All right, Lucas, I am watching some stuff that's been reported with weather, and this is not a weather show, but god damn if I can't but like look at this and say, what is going on? I looked at this post, and this happened a little earlier yesterday, or late in the day yesterday, and what's happening with the weather pattern. I know that Florida got absolutely pounded with rain. I think some reports from NASA said that this is a once in 1,000 years event or something. I'm going to see if I can't find that one. But how are you thinking about the current severe weather pattern that we're encountering this year?
I mean, Grant, I this kind of opens up a touchy subject with some people because like our association with the earth with weather is close to an association with God. It questions our impact on the world. But I have, I'm in the panhandle of Texas. If we look on this map, like I'm up on that green area that's getting touched, and I have lived here my entire life. I've traveled around. I've lived in southern Texas, in Austin for 10 years. I lived near Houston for 10 years. I lived in western Colorado and New Mexico. Um, but in all of that time, I was constantly back here in the Panhandle, and I've certainly noticed in my lifetime that it's the weather has changed a lot. The climate has changed a lot. Like we've gotten a lot hotter, and we've gotten a lot more humid. And I know some very real facts, like physical, like facts of physics. And when water gets warmer, I also work in aviation. I fly, haven't for several years, but you learn a lot about weather. You become an amateur weatherman whenever you learn to fly aircraft also. And it's been long apparent to me that especially the Gulf of Mexico is shallow, that it's picking up a lot more heat. The heat changes not only like the jet stream high up in the winds aloft, like we have different layers of wind, but I mean, what do I see here in short? I see more. We've long known that we're going to get more water, more rain as oceans heat up a little bit. How come? Because we see more water in the atmosphere. So I would say that like these, when I hear like these are 1,500 year events, I think to myself, well, that's like a long term prediction over historical data. I would guess that we're going to begin to see more and more of these, and it's nice and cool up in the Panhandle right now because we have a lot of moisture in the air. It used to be absolutely uh, unbearable down in Austin. I was there for the drought in 2007, and when you don't have any moisture in the air and you have the unbearable heat, it's tough. But I came to Twitter several years ago. I was working for my representative in New Mexico. We were in the district that had 3 million acres of fire burned. Before that, I lived in Durango, where you are, Rusty. I was there for the 416 fire. Um, and the time that I lived in Durango, I saw on the tops of the mountains like the absolute death of stands of trees. I used to take the Emerald Lake Trail fairly often, go back up there, and part of that was beetle kill. But I mean, for those people who don't want to admit that the world is getting warmer, I say like, how much empirical evidence can you ignore? And this is, and I mean, there's also I'll shut up after this. There's also like like the like weather channels and weather events are more like accessible to be recorded with people holding cameras and I mean, sometimes I look at some of these weather terms that they come up with, and I think like it's the nature of commercial news, commercial media to drum up, um, the fervor over some of these events. But we're seeing a lot more severe weather, and I add, going back to fires. I don't know if you saw, but Ruidoso, New Mexico, is on fire, and and if there those places that aren't getting wet as it gets warmer have a lot more tinder. Um, so I don't know. What do you think about all that? That's where when I see these weather patterns, that's what I think.
Rusty, thoughts?
Oh yeah, I was just getting ready to jump in on that. I was listening to Lucas. He was mentioning, living in Durango and being part of the 416 fire. I actually have a firefighter that lives with me as a roommate in the house that I rent from, and he stays with us about 3 or 4 months of the year while he's fighting fires here in Colorado. And it is impressive all the work that he does, and sometimes just how quickly these fires can spread. I remember that fire that Lucas was mentioning. I was up on a roof one time when I was working, and I saw that fire start. We were up on the roof doing our work, and we looked over and we saw smoke coming from a little bit down the road from where we were at. And we decided that that might be the start of something. That we might want to turn around and head back home. And it's a good thing we decided to do that, because shortly after they closed the 550 road that we used to get up to our work site, and they made everybody do a 3-hour detour to get back to town to Durango. And we got lucky and got back down the mountain just in time before they shut down the road. But it is really insane to see how close those fires can get and how impactful they can be. I remember on that same roof we were working there, and the lady was a little bit of a she wanted us to work as much as we could, let's just say that. And so as soon as they reopened the road, she wanted us right back on the roof. And I remember like watching, like there were still fire trucks and firemen up on the hills and the mountains right above us. And there were still fires like breaking out all around us. And they had one of those gigantic like pools built up in the front yard, like those inflatable pools for the water for all the firemen to go into it. And I remember like we're sitting there trying to roof on this lady's house while all this is going on in the background. And I'm just like, can we get any like, you know, breathing help or anything like that? Like the weather and the smog was just terrible. But it does bring into a lot of things going into the weather. My dad was a person that was really loved the weather. Could sit there for hours and just put on the weather channel and watch it when I was a kid. And I could never understand that. I could never understand like how could somebody be so interested in watching the weather? It's like the same thing over and over again, but he would love just watching the weather pattern, seeing how things are going all over the world. And I don't know about you, Lucas, but I prefer wet heat over dry. I mean, I prefer a dry heat over wet heat. I remember when I lived in Japan, man, it was just so wet out there. It was so humid all the time that the heat out there was just so much terrible. I would much rather be in the dry heat.
Well, I don't know. It depends on how much heat there is, I guess. Sometimes, like when it gets over 110 degrees, I kind of like wet heat over dry heat. And I in the dry heat, I definitely it's also a question of whether you're in the sun or not, because like at altitude, being in the sun, as you well know, is a killer. Um,
Yeah, I
Well,
think my
anyway,
dry heat. Oh,
anyway, like breaking in just for a second. So this is kind of the stuff that I was looking at, and it's just because like oftentimes our family ends up in Florida and Miami particularly, so we kind of dodge this one. But look, I don't know if you're seeing what a few things that I've thrown on the screen. So we put the gyre on there, which obviously if you look kind of closely at what's going on here, there's a lot of rain that was getting through into Florida. Some of the video of this, is just absolute flooding going on down there. And then this was a post by David Wallace. This is the one where I said, this said this should only happen, every 500 to 1,000 years. And this is straight off, the Earth Observatory from NASA, saying, hey, this pattern that's happening, this is kind of wild. We don't really see this happen very often. So again, we're not. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the weather, but it's hard to not look at this and say, "Wow, this is kind of wild." I
you know,
did. Go ahead.
Grant, I would also throw into your data collection there. Remember Dubai? There was a crypto conference earlier this year, and they had 1,000-year flooding in or something of the like in Dubai. Do you remember that?
I do
I
remember
remember.
that. Yeah, there was kind of crazy amount of rain falling, and I think if I recall correctly, partially it was said that this was due to just the overabundance of cloud seeding that had been done in Dubai.
Oh, I don't know that I um, going back to being right next to a gulf, a shallower body of water that's picking up more moisture into the air as it heats up. Like it doesn't have as much depth to absorb. Uh, um, uh, I don't know. Cloud seeding. I'm dubious of the efficacy of cloud seeding. Put it that way. But we could talk more about this later. I would love to talk about and I know I guess to tie it to what we normally talk about. Like I think that I've talked about the tokenization of water. I think that the tokenization of forests is something that could help alleviate the tragedy of the commons. I mean, part of the problem that we see in forest fires right now is this sort of top-down notions of let's create massive parks, and if there is any intervention there, let's do it at a institutional level of, I mean, what sense does it make to fight forest fires with a plane, especially one that's using up 100,000 gallons of kerosene and dumping fire retardants on large swaths of the forest. If we had any sense, we would have forest management going on. But instead of using livestock or labor to be using like the resources of our forests, we instead like have some sort of narrative where we have parks that nobody gets to touch until they burn up to nothing. But maybe another time to pick up on that topic. I know we've got GameStop, Bitcoin, all sorts of things.
Yeah, one last thing I wanted to mention. I don't know if I lost this one. Did I? Nope. Huh. Thought I had this queued up. Oh wait, yeah, here we go. I just didn't throw it into the share. So this is something that I remember a lot when I was younger, right? It was that this sort of thing was talked about extensively. Is that many thought we were, slated for the next ice age. Do you recall this at all, Lucas? Like, I'm not.
Absolutely. I remember reading. I mean, probably Reader's Digest when I was a kid.
I saw this video you showed right now, Grant, and watched it.
Yeah. Well, I remember this stuff being talked about when I was a kid, and I'm not at all trying to FUD climate change or whatever. Like, it's hard to deny what is currently happening, right? We are definitely seeing warming. We are seeing abnormal weather. Doesn't belie the fact that, like, not that long ago, we were seeing this kind of stuff. So there are definitely things at play and afoot. We can't ignore them, but it's hard, even as scientists, to sort of understand what's really going on. Some are speculating that we're in some kind of a super cycle thing that's driving some of this. Not at all to say that we aren't in a tremendous warming cycle, or that CO2 might be playing an effect. But I think a lot of what they said was in effect, as far as climate change, greenhouse gas, whatever, was already in play, well into effect at this point. So who knows what's really going to happen. But yeah, interesting stuff going on. I agree, though, Lucas, we should probably turn to some of our other topics, or we're going to quickly run out of time here.
Let me just say, I guess one thing to that is, I think it's important to separate the discussion about whether climate changes from the question of whether like mankind has an impact. And I think that's part of the conflict that we see in this discussion. Is there's an equation between the two, and I think that they are separate questions, and people don't want to talk about whether people as a whole can have an impact or do have an impact, and that because it brings to the fore questions about who deserves to take the rewards or take part in interventions or use of resources. So, and again, that's where I think blockchain and having emergent solutions that are not top down, that are not so authoritarian or amalgamizing groups of people to the tune of 360 million or 8 billion or whatever the number may be, kind of gives us a different technological tool for having that conversation with. But yeah, let's turn to other things. I could go on about fires forever.
All right. So turning from the topic of rain, this post caught my eye. Lucas, did you have a chance to take a look at this at all?
I didn't see this post. No, I don't know if I missed you sharing this. What's going on here? Can you give me a breakdown real quick?
All right. So, as everybody who's listening to this show knows, we've been keeping an eye on GameStop and what's going on here. So we know that GameStop has been directly shorted, but then it seems like there is another way that that GameStop is being shorted, and that's via an ETF. So we've talked about ETFs within the context of Bitcoin. You know, like there's this thing, stock, they buy Bitcoin, you can buy it. That's an exchange traded fund. But the more traditional usage of an ETF has been to create exposure to a basket of stocks, right? So if you say, well, I want to have exposure to, say, the tech sector, right? Then somebody might go out and cherry pick a whole bunch of stocks. And this would allow you to have access to a broad range of stocks with a single purchase price. And the reason this might be interesting for some people is because it might be hard to amass the amount of capital you would need to even have one share of each of the companies that you wanted to buy. Like if you imagine you said, I want to have exposure to Microsoft and maybe Nvidia and Apple and Google and whatever, like a whole bunch of different things. You know, if they're not splitting their stock to making the stock price very accessible, then it might be hard to even get one share of these, and you might not have the mix that you're interested in, right? Like it might be way overexposed on Apple or something, and you want to have more exposure on Nvidia, but you don't have the $1,300 that you needed to buy one share of Nvidia. So ETFs were created, largely to allow for this diversity of exposure. And GameStop is a stock which has been held by ETFs. So if you look at these images, so this is kind of what is speculated to be going on here is that there are ETF shares that hold some amount of GameStop, and because they hold some amount of GameStop, by shorting the ETF, you're effectively shorting GameStop. So that's what's being discussed here. And if you look at the amount of short interest on some of these ETFs, it just seems really abnormal. Like, why are these ETFs so short? You know, because the short interest has to be published, and so when a stock is shorted, these particular ETFs have really abnormal short interest. Like, it's not common for an ETF to be shorted 400%. So why are they being shorted 400% like this? Well, this guy is saying it's because they hold GameStop, and because they hold GameStop, that makes it, a way that you can short GameStop kind of on the sly.
I think this is we should talk maybe about ETFs too. I just pulled up the history of ETFs because, again, I remember the inception of ETFs, and interestingly enough, they came along the same time as we were getting electronic access to, like, also using computers to supposedly give more people access to a stock market. And part of the narrative of them was that they were breaking it up into smaller parts and giving retail or people with smaller incomes, smaller assets, poorer people access to financial instruments. And I'm dubious of that narrative of ETFs. I think that again, having like electronic access, or so you don't have to physically go to New York City or Chicago or wherever an exchange is to physically trade in those certificates is one thing. But this notion of breaking it up into smaller pieces and giving people access, I think, has been abused by has given people with I don't know, more knowledge and more money the ability to abuse more people. Am I making any sense there? Grant, Rusty?
I'm busy pulling something up. Sorry, I was as we do on this show, when a question comes up, what is an exchange traded fund? That's that's just what I'm sort of just using the canonical definition of what this is. So I don't know. Like you're saying there was an ulterior motive here to
Well, I mean, scroll down and you can look at the history of when exchange traded funds come to be, and I pulled it up earlier. It's 1980. I remember like 95. I graduated in 95, 99. I invested in my first mutual fund in 1995 with E-Trade whenever it was first coming around, and there was all of this promise that the internet was going to bypass some of the traditional structure of having somebody who was a professional in that field, and that the internet was going to distribute knowledge. And I remember, like, first time I heard exchange traded fund, I thought, why hasn't the narrative been like electronic, like giving people access through networks? And
I just had thought it was always about this diversification, thing. It's like a way to make an index.
well, yeah, I mean, that's part of it. But going back to like our conversation yesterday about how we have seen the the speed of transaction and the speed of access used to propel the financial system to passing things around more quickly, instead of holding on to some certificate and making a long-term bet and being part of the narrative of like the success of that institution. I think these lower transaction costs have given rise to people who do not have the best interests of when you can jump in and out of a stock so quickly. And think about this maybe in terms of like how the ecosystem of Solana behaves as opposed to that of Ethereum. When you can jump in and out of something, and there are such low transaction costs, and also like they've been broken down to like, instead of investing in General Electric now, you can invest in General Electric and Ford Motor and 20 other companies. Do you actually care about the mission of those companies, or you just care about making money?
I mean, probably you just care about making money, but again, like I think it's about that broad exposure. It's like you can always go buy the individual stock. So the question is, why would you buy an ETF? It's so that you can get that basket. I think it's so you can get the index.
Well, but then we come to this concept of shorts too, because shorts are supposed to be a check on that system. So somebody can bet against these ETFs, but whenever
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so shorting the ETF would say this index of things I think is going to go the wrong direction. Whoever put this together, like they may have said, hey, this is a good investment. Somebody else looks at it and says, you picked 8 companies here. I think all of these are going to go into broad-based decline. So I mean, we've definitely seen where entire sectors have gotten punished, right? The dot-com bubble, 2008 housing collapse. I think we're going to see commercial paper, commercial real estate is going to go through a cycle like that, shortly, or we're in the thick of it. Actually, I would argue that, commercial real estate is just getting pounded right now.
well,
So so it's a way to bet against something that, people say is it going to go through a broad-based decline.
Well, I mean, go back to the dot-com bubble. There were a lot of losers there. We also had, I mean, go back to that time. We also had NAFTA being opened up at the time, sort of ameliorated some of the effects of that. Was like embracing more international trade, buying things cheaper, maybe taking advantage of foreign countries. Would be another way to see that. But like you mentioned pink slips or commercial paper. That was that was part of the bust in 2008, 2009. But we saw massive bailouts then. Like part of the problem of having these ETFs and financial instruments that like distribute risk and distribute I don't know, the counter to risk is that it makes it a political quandary as to letting. I mean, do we let 401k holders in America fail? Do we let banks fail? We seem to have a lot of political interventions now that don't allow for any losers. You know, and we also have this concept. Well, the SEC or some political, some watchdog from the government is going to intercede and act on our behalf, but it would seem that they have instead been taken advantage of by private groups or corporations or groups of people, whatever, that have more knowledge, more history, and know how to make sure that they don't fail. So that's what I was dismayed to see these ETFs being applied to crypto, in part because I worried about the interruption of the feedback in the valuation of the chains, and I'm afraid that we're going to see that more and more. And because buying an ETF is not buying into an ETF, no matter who it's offered by, and some may be fairer than others, is not the same as buying a Bitcoin, and it's not the same as participating in that network.
So I hear you on that. To me, the distinction here is whether you have a custodial risk, right? That to me is kind of the prime distinction between the two. And actually, it kind of feeds into a different thing that we wanted to bring up. So might as well just jump to that one. So this post by Bianco Research said that most of the purchasing into the Bitcoin ETFs have been coming from self-directed investors. Like another way to maybe describe this, which I put in the title here, is that this is the degens of the world. So if we actually click through to the article that he's referencing, this is saying that the real institutional players have not even jumped in yet, which I find kind of surprising. I thought that we were actually in a cycle where we were starting to see this, and I know that during some of the opening discussions regarding the Bitcoin ETF, a lot of the narrative was around having individual financial advisors telling their clients how they can get exposure to Bitcoin in a way that doesn't require them to do a lot of extra work, right? Like if you're going to sell custody Bitcoin, if you're going to buy it, there's a lot of steps that you have to do. You have to figure out how to set up a wallet. You have to get into a crypto exchange. You got to go buy it yourself. You got to take control of it. So it's a lot of moving parts versus, you already have your brokerage account set up. You already have your 401k. You're already working with your broker. How do I get some exposure to Bitcoin? Buy the Bitcoin ETF. It's simple as that. So I thought we were already at the point where we were starting to see more adoption from, big TradFi, but apparently, according to these guys, the ETFs and Bitcoin ETFs particularly, and probably well extended into what will happen with the Ethereum ETFs, is that we haven't seen TradFi or the big players really get in at all yet.
I saw another post when I was looking online, and it said something about that BlackRock has gained, I think it was 477,000 Bitcoin tokens, which is equal to $31 million or 30. I forget the exact amount of money it was worth, but I think there was like 47,000 Bitcoin is now owned by BlackRock, and that they've been gobbling it up. So I don't know. It just may be from different people who are saying different things.
I don't know. I think if maybe a traditional financial institution is asking the question of how many Bitcoin do they have to hold to create an ETF, because if they're making money off of if they're making dollars, I should say, off of the transactions based on the holding of why should they care how much Bitcoin they have, or what the underlying price of Bitcoin is. Like having derivatives that are generating that are being moved around based on faith of on a Bitcoin is different than actually using that Bitcoin. So and maybe they have an understanding of that and think that there will be a that the value of Bitcoin will fluctuate. I don't know. Grant. I don't I don't know why they haven't jumped in. I think it's more interesting to see with that regard, like also nation states like El Salvador adopting Bitcoin instead. I don't think that we focus enough on like everyone talks about these ETFs and the assets that they hold, but I think it would be more interesting to be tracking how many countries are moving to holding Bitcoin, or and I know we mentioned stable coins in the last episode. Like it will be interesting to see how many of them start creating a currency for the use of their citizens that is basically an ETF or stable coin for the use of their citizens, and holding Bitcoin, Ethereum, or whatever's in that basket for the generation of that stable coin. Am I too heretical?
No, I think I'm just pulling up the post that I think maybe we were talking about.
Yeah, I think that's the one I was looking at.
Yeah. So sorry, Lucas, sometimes there's a delay because like if we're talking about something, I'm gonna make some attempt to try and get it on the screen so people can reference it later if they want. But yeah, I think that this was just starting to look at some of the metrics of where we're at. This is large growth. There's a lot of Bitcoin that's getting gobbled up from these things, and I don't know that your take on this is particularly heretical. It's just we're again looking at how is it actually happening, how's it playing out, and it's interesting to look at the numbers and review where we're at. Especially if this is right, that this amount of Bitcoin buying action is not the big players. I have seen some posts that say that there are central banks that are starting to buy Bitcoin. So we could just be on the cusp of some big moves in Bitcoin. I know that we had talked about shorting Bitcoin before, and I've seen some very interesting takes on what's going on with that and kind of how those trades are actually functioning. So it might be an interesting thing to dive back into as well.
Well, if you would, maybe I'll lean on an outside authority. One book that I don't hear mentioned often enough. Everyone talks about Safid Amos and his book about Bitcoin, but there's a great book about money called The Money Plot by Frederick, haha, the Frederick Kaufman. The Money Plot by Frederick Kaufman. And I know I've mentioned before that one way to think about the difference between money and finance, or monetary policy and fiscal policy, is that money starts in the present and counts into the future, and finance starts in the future and counts backwards to now. But that there's a great explanation from that in The Money Plot by Frederick Kaufman. I had mentioned that sort of concept of counting forward or counting backwards before. I thought I should give a citation or the allusion to it. So if anybody wants to give a read there, it's
I think I found it. Does that look like the right one?
Yep, that's it. Yep, from shells to bullion to Bitcoin.
Shockingly, no Wikipedia entry for this one. So
really,
yeah.
oh.
So maybe you have a task for the day to go write an article or paste in some information.
It's a powerful thing to make that Wikipedia entry. So I'll try to get on that actually.
It's also kind of surprising whenever you find a tiny little hole in that repository of knowledge, because usually it's pretty comprehensive. But I guess it can occasionally happen where something gets overlooked. Not every single book makes it into Wikipedia yet.
I was reading in some newspaper articles from the 1880s, 1890s, and then a detailed history of New Mexico from 1913, and I found some facts that were quite contrary to the common narrative of New Mexican history. And I had several arguments with proprietors of museums and other I don't know, presenters of history on the Facebook. And I went and changed the Wikipedia articles and cited those newspapers and that 1913 comprehensive history of New Mexico that was I don't know, requested by the New Mexico House of Representatives. And all of a sudden, all those arguments died away. And next thing I knew, I was like reading newspaper articles that were citing some of those facts. So there's the power of Wikipedia. I'll for sure go add the money plot.
So you're a Wikipedia editor. Kudos. That's amazing.
My Twitter byline used to say the Wikipedia devastate / decimate ombudsman. Ombudsman. I don't even know how to say that word. Because it drives me crazy when I see somebody use the word decimate when they actually mean to use the word devastate. I don't know if you're aware of the difference between the two.
Well, I think decimate means that you've reduced it by what, 10%? Deci meaning like how much?
Yep. Actually, and it goes back to a Roman reporting back from the damages taken by the troops. And if there was a slight damages taken, moderate, maybe not slight, but moderate to slight damages taken, they were decimated. And if there were, massive losses and they were hurt in a big way, they were devastated. But, so, I hope that you facepalm now when you see, sports reporters or journalists or Wikipedia articles that say they were decimated.
That's just the shifting of language. That's it's just the nature of the beast, I think.
Yeah, well, DE, 4 syllables. What's the difference? Anthropomorphic, anthropological. What's the difference between antho and anthro? Who knows? But yeah, the money plot, it's a great one. I don't know. I don't want to throw too many books out, but also, have you ever read the Price of Time?
No, I haven't read that one.
You might give that one. We were talking about Hyperion. We were talking about books last week, and I pulled up my Audible account, and I noticed that it's one that I've listened to a couple of times. I know you seem to be stoked about some of the concepts whenever we were talking about the water tokenization of water, sort of emergent value pricing. And the Price of Time gets into where we get the concepts of interest from, and how it takes a different amount of time to raise a field of wheat. It takes a different amount of time to raise a litter of pigs. And some of those agricultural commodity notions of where value comes from, what expectation of that coming value is. Venetian merchants sending a ship to the Spice Isles, they very much considered how long that ship was going to take and what the security risks were for that amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. And before we relied on one ubiquitous federal funds rate for determining what interest was, there were emergent and a number of different ways that we figured out what the price of time was. So it's another good one if you're interested in money. That's we don't hear enough about. The Real Story of Interest. Another good subtitle. So
reminding me of one of my favorite books about time. This is a book that I've read many times. I don't tend to read as much about, financial history as I do about science. And this one, I absolutely love this book. I've read this a number of times, by Carlo Rovelli. This is talking about loop quantum gravity. And one of the interesting things that he talks about in this book is the concept of time, like how it's shifted, how, it used to be that time was always thought of to be local, and that it was, sort of when there were clock towers that would dole out time locally. And it wasn't until we started to have this need to synchronize trains. And he said that it was no mistake that, it was Einstein's work, when he was sort of around trains, that led him to starting to think about time in the ways that he did. So yeah, this book I really enjoyed. So if you haven't had a chance to check this one out, Lucas, it would be high on my recommendation list of books to read. It's pretty short. You can read it pretty fast, but really, really interesting introduction to loop quantum gravity.
I have read it, and I agree. It's one of my favorite books because it gets us. Um, I mean, it's one of the issues that I'm very fascinated with. Like, I can't stand, for starters, daylight savings time, and I don't know. I find it's interesting that we live in a world where we just accept these time zones. And I used to, again, going back to being in the mountains, Rusty. I used to tell all my friends that if I spent a lot of time at 14,000 feet, I was dramatically extending my lifespan by 1 or 2 microseconds, because time is slower as we get further away from the center of gravity. Um, so no, I mean, I think there probably, I don't know if it's in that book too, but talking about taking atomic clocks on airplane rides, and that's where I first began to get where became aware. Again, going back to flying, being aware that whenever you're on a plane, actually, as you're traveling faster, time slows down. So commercial pilots also are cheating us all by slowing down time and getting to live longer. I hope that their insurance adjusters are taking that into account. Um, is there anything else by Carlo Rovelli? Has he written anything else? I should.
I've looked. I think that this is one of the most accessible books that he's written. It's kind of like Stephen Hawking's book that he wrote, famously, and sort of popularized some idea. So I don't know, like, if he's really gotten a popular book beyond this one, but he's a practicing physicist, so he's definitely out there publishing papers and doing experiments and trying to advance the field. But yeah, let me take a quick look and see if there's anything else that sort of popped into the public consciousness.
Well, I see some of his titles there. I'm gonna have to see what Heligoland, and White Holes are about. I mean, brief lessons of physics, yay. Probably good. So, 7 brief lessons of physics. Um, but Helgoland, and White Holes. He's a very, the Order of Time is just a one of those books that changed my life. It's right there next to Guns, Germs, and Steel, and The Origins of Political Order on my bookshelf. So, but I've never read anything else by him. Um, anyway, uh, don't mean to go too far off into throwing books at our listeners. What else? Do we have time? What, it's 10:44. What do we have time to talk about? Chia, price of chia.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let me get something pulled up for it.
So, Rusty, sorry to go off and have a conversation about chia, but we have to subject you to this. And I hope that you are taking part more in the chia ecosystem with the Aerodome and some of the bridges that have been made. The ALIS 300 THNDIO swap 2 gives us more ability to jump into that ecosystem. But and going to conversation as Grant pulls up the chart, the price of chia has taken a dive. I sort of looked around the chia Reddit page and looked on a couple of Twitter accounts, but I could not find anyone discussing as to what could possibly be going on here. Grant, did you have any thoughts as to what might be happening with the price action, or is this should we chalk it up to weather?
I, well, first off, this falls below a target price that I've been tracking for a while with chia. Frankly, pretty surprised to see this. Before chia went through its first halving, we had done some fairly decent analysis of what is the relative profitability of chia at certain electrical costs, like what it costs to have your a fairly large number of hard drives racked, if you were to start using GPUs, like whatever's going on. And 25 was sort of the price target. And so if you look historically, it's been pretty rare that we get anywhere near a price like this. So if we zoom out on this, you can see that it's been pretty uncommon that we actually go anywhere near a price like this. The last time we were anywhere close to this was here, back in 2023, and this was before the halving. So I think some of the things that had occurred when this was happening was there was excitement that was building around the halving. There was excitement about the IPO, and we kind of ripped up to this really shockingly high number of like almost $60. I think we actually did touch on 60 or dang near close to it. I think these charts oftentimes don't really show the true spike, but I remember being around that time that 60 was kind of as high as it went. And then we sort of hung out just, at like 35 to 40, whatever, and then hung out in the 30s for a while. And then, it's just recently, since, essentially April, that we've started to test some really low lows here. We dropped below 30, kind of climbed back up above 30, dropped below, back up, and now we're just on this real slide. And it hasn't been with any, large amount of volume either. It's not like we've suddenly seen some shocking amount of volume here. If you look at how much volume is going on, it isn't like there's a ton. So we're sort of just hanging out at this relatively low price here, in these recent days. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer for this. Like why we're seeing this at all. Like I don't really know. I haven't seen anybody talking about this particularly. So I don't know if this is some broad-based sell-off or if this is just some recent trend. But like I said, there's no real huge spike in volume or anything. This is kind of par for the course and how much is being traded. It just seems somehow there's some amount of chia that's being sold off, and yeah, they're willing to sell it cheap apparently.
In some ways, I think that maybe chia is a victim of the larger narrative in crypto of I don't know, speculation on the token price. I think Ethereum and the early like ICO models really. Going back to Bitcoin before Ethereum, I think Bitcoin was something that people had been waiting for, were excited about, and like the slow release of those tokens was fundamental for its like long-term success. But shortly after it became noticed, there were people who understood the financial impact it was going to be, even if they were 15, 20 years early. And they started.
Well, let's just compare it though, right? I mean, like, okay. So here's chia, right? So 1 month period of time, and then let's look at Solana. I mean, this is they're experiencing similar types of highs, lows, and broad-based declines. I don't know if.
I was gonna mention the price of Solana in comparison to what you're talking about with Chia, and don't ever really need to apologize about wanting to talk about Chia, Lucas. It's a interesting blockchain and something I'm interested. It actually came across my vision earlier today. I was watching a 30-minute interview with one of my favorite people I like to watch, Shib Toshi, and his project Squid Grow, and I was listening to him and watching him, and he actually took part of his name from the Evergrow project, and I believe that was the Evergrow miners that was used to produce chia. Correctly, if I'm right.
Evergreen, yeah, that's one of them. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. It was, and he really liked that token and the kind of what they were doing, and he kind of combined that to make the name of his project. And so that was kind of something that surprised me this morning when I was listening in and learning about it. And if it's something that somebody like that is interested in, I think it's a really impressive blockchain with everything that you guys have been covering in the last couple months and weeks, with how they've been doing the tokenization and how they've been allowing the different ways of verifying things, and the way they're working in with the housing prices and trying to tokenize housing. It's really interesting to me. It's not something that I go off and try to research on my own. So whatever I can come into here and try to learn, I enjoy.
So
Well,
just
awesome.
kind of comparing these three, right? If we say, let's just look at Bitcoin, and then let's look at Chia, and then look at Solana. I see a lot of similarities in these. It's like when we're in sort of this green area, however they're drawing this line. I'm not exactly sure why this line is it's above or below, but like, where you're seeing the greens and the reds on, Solana, Chia, and then also on Bitcoin, we're kind of seeing a broad-based decline in a lot of crypto. So maybe this is just where, Chia has been insulated from some of these market trends. Maybe it's just starting to trade more with the broader market, and that might be due to some of these bridges and things getting set up. So now Chia is less insulated from it, because in a lot of ways, Chia was very insulated. You didn't have access to Chia on the centralized exchanges. There weren't any bridges set up, so Chia sort of traded on its own because it was relegated to some dusty corners of the crypto markets. But now maybe it just trades with standard ups and downs and swings of the crypto market, which all seems to trade very correlated.
True, and but going back to earlier our conversation about ETFs, I wonder what the price of Bitcoin would be now if no ETFs had been approved, and yet we were on the heels of the political interest of say Cynthia Loomis, on the heels of the Fit 21 Financial Innovation Technology Act, some of this broader acceptance of crypto, and so I wonder if the ETFs have deflated. I don't know, financial expectations as to this price. I also think those are great points about the Chia being exposed to the volatility of Bitcoin. But then I also think Chia, that like people, Chia is an early chain. It's been like developed, but I don't know what I was going to say earlier about the price of these coins. It would seem to me like if you were going to evaluate or have a better, like a better discovery of the price of, say, like Ethereum, it would be real world companies that are using that blockchain for tokenizing their sales, their assets, something or other, and are paying those gas fees to validators. But what we've instead seen is this financial the financial I don't know, people with dollars in their pockets and looking to make money on price volatility coming in first. And so maybe it's a good thing that is now being removed and put into the traditional financial markets through ETFs, but it also has caused an adjustment. That's when I see that price chart, that's what I see. So I don't know. I'm still incredibly bullish on Chia, but I think that we need to see more like real world applications of blockchains, and not just wide adoption of people using them for ease of financial instruments.
Well, I think that's why it was interesting to have Matthew on, and when we were talking about his tokenizing real estate and how some of the rest of the market is picking up on some ways that there are real world use cases for using blockchains to do things like tokenization, providing liquidity, providing access to capital. And I hope to have a follow up conversation with him kind of when he's ready. Hey, just to kind of close out the show, there was one other thing that we had in our title that we didn't get a chance to talk to. I wanted to mention this. So, something that's been going on with respect to, fail to delivers and things that are happening in the market. So it's interesting to look at failed to delivers and what happens when shorts are having to return shares. So this post caught my eye particularly because there was an extremely volatile trading day. Look at this, Lucas. On May 13th, 481 million shares traded, and then recently had published that the fail to deliver on that day is this, laughable 917 number. This just does not seem to make any sense at all about like what was really happening that day. Like how can we have this record numbers of fail to delivers on all these other days, but on this the most volatile day, uh, it doesn't line up. And this number is just gobsmackingly like shocking number. Um, I don't know. That's interesting. So if you're at all trying to keep up with some of this stuff, looking at the fail to deliver numbers is very interesting and something worth some attention.
So, do you think possibly the answer could be wash trading or swap trading or
Well, okay, so this is, definitely not retail trading. Like I think any thought that what's going on with GameStop and AMC is retail trades. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but like think about how a retail trader has to trade, right? When you get money, right? You get money because you got paid. And you get paid on this cadence, right? So maybe you get paid every 2 weeks or every month or whatever. Very few people get paid with any kind of frequency that's higher than that. So money flows into your account. Usually you can make like one move or two moves, right? So for 480 million shares or 65 million or 100 million shares to trade hands, during these relatively small windows of time, it cannot ever be said that this is retail because if you are trading as a retail investor, there is a thing called pattern day trading that you get hit with. And I'm going to pull something up on that just so, I put it on the screen in case anybody's interested in understanding how this works. But anyway, pattern day trading is something that you get hit with, and you can have your account suspended or even closed if you're found to be doing this. So it's a regulation that prevents most traders from, doing lots of trades. So it says that you can't execute more than 4 trades within a span of 5 business days, and you get strikes against your account if you do this. So you can be flagged as a pattern day trader by your broker. You have to have a certain amount of money in your account. See, it says pattern day traders are required to hold 25,000 in their margin account. And if it drops below, they will be prohibited from making further trades until the balance is brought back up. How many people do you know who just like have $25,000 laying around, not only laying around, but like they have to maintain that level to be able to do, frequency of trades. So this idea that retail who is getting their money from working a day job, and getting it on this cadence of every 2 weeks to a month, that's just ridiculous. There's no way this is retail that is driving this kind of volume. It doesn't make any sense, and I don't see how it could ever have even been thought that it was retail that driving this sort of volume in these stocks.
well, I know the number of people that have 25,000 in there of retail traders that I know, and that's zero. Um, so if it's institutional investors, like why are they driving the volume like that? Are
Just because there's volatility and there are people who have positions that are, they're trying to protect it. They're trying to keep the price in certain ranges, and I think whenever you ask a question like that, it's derivatives. It's always going to be derivatives. Like, why does it operate the way it does? Because derivatives.
Interesting. Well,
And that's a good place, I think, to close it. So we'll leave it on a why derivatives.
yep. Okay, I like that. Derivatives. The answer is derivatives. It used to be 42.
All right, but we'll definitely catch up tomorrow. So see you guys tomorrow.
All right. See you tomorrow. Enjoyed it.